Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Luke Stutters. Hello. Darren Bramer.
Hey, everybody.
Valentino Stoll.
Hey there.
Dave Kimura.
Hey, everyone.
And Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And this week, we have a special guest, and that is Kingsley Chijioke. Kingsley, do you want to introduce yourself? Let us know who you are, why you're world famous.
I can't say I'm world famous. My name is Kingsley from Nigeria, live in Lagos, Nigeria. I work as a software engineer for Vibes. Vibes is a mobile marketing platform based in Chicago. On the side, I work for Smashing Magazine as a technical editor. I've written a couple of articles on Ruby and Rails and React and Vue and the likes. Yeah, mostly those.
When I went freelance, I was still only a few years into my development career. My first contract, I was paid $60 an hour. Due to feedback from my friends, I raised it to $120 an hour on the next contract. And due to the podcasts I was involved in and the screencasts I had made in the past, I started getting calls from people I'd never even heard of who wanted me to do development work for them because I had done that kind of work or talked about or demonstrated that kind of work in the videos and podcasts that I was making. Within a year, I was able to more than double my freelancing rates, and I had more work than I could handle. If you're thinking about freelancing or have a profitable but not busy or fulfilling freelance practice, let me show you how to do it in my Dev Heroes Accelerator. Dev Heroes aren't just people who devs admire, they're also people who deliver for clients who know, like, and trust them. Let me help you double your income and fill your slowdowns. You can learn more at devheroesaccelerator.com.
Oh, wow. Well, I feel like you're smarter than me already because I know Ruby and then I just kind of talk about the rest of that stuff. You wrote an article on the Honey Badger blog, Understanding Ruby Method Lookup. And I always like to ask, when people write these articles, why'd you write this? Were you struggling with this? Did you learn this for any particular reason or? Yeah.
So I came across this article by someone here in Nigeria, that's the CEO of Bycoins. He wrote about prepend, include, and extend. So I was on a Medium post. His name is Timmy. So I had used include before. So I needed to probably understand how prepend works better and extend and cases, basically scenarios where I would have to use all of them. Then I came across, I have a copy of Well-Grounded Rubyist. I'm not sure I can remember the author. So I dived into it and did a little bit of reading. That was where I came across the Ruby lookup path first. So looked interesting, something I had not learned before. So I decided to learn this. And pretty much what I do most times is when I learn something or in order to perfect it and have a better grasp of it, I write about it. It helps me open up to blind spots that I don't have. So typically the need to learn drove me into writing it.
Cool.
So I hadn't seen this article till just now, and initially I thought that this talk was going to be just about how to find methods and where they're defined, but it's actually really interesting because the article goes much deeper than just where do you find a method. It goes to the actual call chain hierarchy of when you call this method on a object, it's going to first go here to this place to look it up, and then it just follows up the chain. And the article speaks to this hierarchy, and it's first going to look here, then here, then here. So that's really interesting and really good Ruby fundamentals to know.
So let's kind of start with the basic idea of where a method is defined. So if you just have an object out there, where does it generally just look for those methods? Let's say it's just a method on just that object, right? So if I do def object.method, right, and I just define it just right there, it doesn't come in from the class or anything else. Where does that actually live?
So that lives in something we call the so at that point it's going to be called a singleton method because we are defining it on an object. Typically we say everything in Ruby is an object. When you define a method in a class, is basically defining a method for an object. Yeah. So when you define when you do def an object dot a method, that method lives in a special kind of class. Dave Thomas have a video on this. It's called the Ruby Objects. Video is on YouTube. where he explained most of this in detail. So it's almost like Ruby creates some kind of singleton class or some kind of singleton collection where it holds that specific method defined on that object itself. The same thing happens when you define what we call class methods in Ruby. It's not available. Basically, it's not going to be available to all of the instances in that class. It's going to be only available to that class. So it creates this collection of singleton methods for that class or for that object itself and houses them there. So for the case scenario you mentioned, that is the first place the objects or Ruby would look into. Then if it doesn't see it there, it goes into the class of the superclass of that object.
Yeah, I remember years and years and years ago, there was a video series by Dave Thomas on pragmatic programmers, and he explains a lot of this. And he always did this up and to the right, and it was kind of this, you move up and to the right, up to the class. Yeah. And then he put this little ghost over it, and it was like, there's a ghost class, every time you go up and to the right. And it was this ghost class that's not defined as like a formal class, but it's where all those singleton methods live.
Yeah.
I don't believe in ghost classes.
Yeah, Kingsley, I really liked your article, and I learned from it. I guess one thing that it made me think about when I was learning Ruby, if you're coming from a statically typed language, most languages have the construct of an import or an include. So in Java, you import another package or a specific class, and then you can reference it. And so when I first started learning Ruby, I was thinking of include as a similar type construct. But for those who are learning Ruby, maybe new to it or just getting a refresher, your article is a good reminder. That's actually it's not the same semantic mechanism, right? So as you point out in your article, when you include a module, whatever, you're actually changing the order in which that method lookup occurs.
Yeah.
So in Java, if it was ambiguous reference in Java, for example, you would get a compiler because the compiler doesn't know which thing object to use, whether to use it from some other module I included or from the class itself. But in Ruby, right, the include, prepend, the other directives that you mentioned, they're actually specifying, well, what order should I resolve this in? And I haven't really ever used prepend before, so that was good to think about, when I need to think about those things. But to me, that's what I thought about when I was reading your article, and I think it's good for beginners in Ruby to kind of think through that and understand how that works.
Yeah. I've also never had a case scenario of using prepend yet. I've always made use of include. I've never used extend. I'm not sure I've used it, but I've had to use include a handful of times. And initially, all of the initial times I made use of include, I never knew how the method lookup works till I wrote the article, till I read about it. And I think it's one of those things where you have a powerful tool and you don't know how powerful it is because you don't know the extent to which it can do stuff. So I think understanding and not just using it, but understanding how it works and how it changes the hierarchy of things is really, really important for Ruby programmers. Yeah.
So one thing I'm not sure I maybe necessarily agree with, but maybe you all can educate me or give me your perspective. The singleton is actually the first order of precedence in the method lookup chain. I'm not sure at first glance if I would have put that number one. It seems like I might have preferred anything within a more localized scope, such as the class method, but curious to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, the thing about that is it really has to do with how you are calling the method. And so say you define a class method, you have a class and you define a class method. If you call the method on an instance, then Ruby is not going to look into the singleton class. But if you call it on the class itself, it looks into the singleton class because let's say we have a class called class human and you have a method def speak. It's not a class method. It's basically an instance method. Those methods are available to the instances of that class. So then I create a new instance of that class and I call the speak method on that instance. Ruby won't look into the singleton class. But if I have a class method and I call the speak method now on the class itself, like human.speak. In that case, Ruby looks into the singleton class.
Yeah, I guess it's just the perspective that you're speaking of. So I can see it go either way.
So let's say that I include two modules that define the same method. What order does it do the lookup in?
In that case, the most recent method takes precedence.
So whatever I include last.
Yeah.
I think this is a reason why prepend exists.
This is
you include enough modules and you find yourself digging through a ton of files to find the same method.
Yeah, that's a good call out because it seems like there's some recipe for trouble there.
I think Rails has an underlying issue with this.
In worst case, you could always call source location to find out where it's actually calling it from.
Yeah.
how do you call source location?
On the actual method, I'm pretty sure.
The method.
I just grep the entire directory. Doesn't work for metaprogramming, but you'd be amazed how far you can get.
Yeah. If you call like user.method in parentheses, the method name, like full name, you can then call .source location on there and it'll return where that location is defined, where that method's defined.
Interesting.
I want to ask about what I call the namespace minefield. And this is a field that I had to traverse this week when I was doing some Python programming. And of course, I don't know what the built-in functions are in Python. So if I decide I want a variable called range, apparently range is a magic word in Python. So suddenly I've stepped on the namespace minefield and my program blows up. So this is, I'm guessing this kind of, when you're hunting the method, and Kingsley in this article, this is kind of mainly to do with when you've defined a method with one name, but another method exists of the same name and it's knocking out your method. Am I right?
Yeah.
Now, I tend to give my methods incredibly long, complicated names, like has user and doesn't have sausage with underscores between them to avoid this. So yeah, no, I do. I go for long method names.
I'm hungry now.
Well, yeah, if you give your methods really long names, there's no way someone else has come up with that name, have they?
Challenge accepted. I mean, that's definitely one way of working around it. And I do like the lookup. One other thing that I'm curious about, though, is can't you do like object.ancestors or something and see what the lookup chain actually looks like and just see if something's superseding you?
Yeah. I think, you should be able to.
I think this kind of methodology of looking up where a method is called from, especially with using the ancestors, it can be extremely helpful if you are trying to debug an application that you are being introduced to. So it's not something, this kind of stuff, I don't think I would really use on an application where I created the repository, the code base, and I've kind of lived with it all this time. But coming into onboarding onto an already established application, this can provide a lot of insight to someone who doesn't know the code base yet. And it can also provide them some kind of hierarchy of how things are organized, along with looking at the code base, but it can just bring some of that knowledge to the foreground.
Kingsley, I'm curious.
Yeah,
what you've kind of taken away and used from knowing the ordering. Has this changed the way you program at all? Like, do you find
a little?
Do you find yourself using extend more now that you know what it does and where it?
No. I still don't use extend. I've really never had. I think the only scenario or the only case where I would have to make use of extend is if I need a class method that has to be used across different classes. Basically, not so. If I have a class method that needs to do something that has to be done across different classes, then I would have to take that behavior, put it in a module, then attach it into a class by using the extend. But I've never had a case scenario for that. All of the times I've had to use either of these has always been include. And thinking about it, I still have not been able to figure out or imagine how a case scenario for using prepend, because prepend basically brings the module before the class. So I think the only scenario for that would be if I have a behavior that probably overrides a method already in the class, and I want that to happen before Ruby. I think I just found a scenario for it before Ruby gets to the class itself. So that would be the only case scenario for when I would use prepend. But I think I've been fortunate enough not to have something like that.
Yeah, I know I've done prepend for overriding library classes. Like, bad example, but RSpec has a lot of singleton class methods, and you can override them with a prepend to have it handle describe a different way or a let block or something like that. Do you know how the super behaves differently within each of these kind of mixed in modules? Have you noticed that? Have you ever had to kind of use inheritance on the methods for using include or prepend and kind of how the behavior changes?
No, I've never had to do that. Aside from cases where one would have a single inheritance from classes to one class. Yeah, but I've never had to do that in an application I'm working on. I think the only time I did that was for learning purpose, and that was when I was learning about this and writing this article. But in a reward scenario, I've never done that.
So I guess the other thing that I'm kind of curious about is that as you go through all the different places where it looks, you kind of start out with the singleton methods. We talked about that, and we talked about the mix-in modules, instance methods on the class, instance methods on the parent class, and it kind of follows the inheritance tree all the way up, which is always my favorite thing to try and figure out, right? When you inherit, and then inherit. Don't do that, please, people. But then you get up to like object and kernel and basic object and stuff like that, because everything in Ruby inherits from those. And I was curious as you dive into that, one of the things that I found working with people who haven't worked in Ruby as long as I have is that a lot of times they don't know what's in there. And so I was curious as you kind of dove into that, did you find useful things in object or kernel? Kernel's my favorite, by the way. Object, kernel, or basic object that you were like, oh, I didn't realize that every object in Ruby does this thing.
No, I actually didn't dive into object, kernel, and basic objects. I just went with the idea that these classes and the model, the kernel model, are basically things that are available to every object in Ruby. So I did not dig into any of them to find out what they do, or basically what is contained, what they have at the moment.
Cool. Well, I'm going to encourage our listeners to go and check out, if you get a chance, just go check out what all is in kernel, because it's kind of fun to go see, oh, it does all this stuff. And then also go check out object and basic object. Basic object's kind of basic, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey folks, it's Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to jump in here and let you know about something that I'm doing. It's free. It's out there just to help you get answers to your questions about the things that you're running into with your career. So if you have questions about how to get further ahead in your career, how to start a podcast, how to get a better job, how to get a raise, how to deal with a situation at work with your boss, or just maybe you're stuck and you don't know where to go next. You know, how do I get from junior to senior to whatever's next? How do I become a speaker? How do I get to the next level? That's what I'm out here to do. So every Wednesday at 12 o'clock Mountain Time, I'm going to be doing a call, and it's going to be free, totally free. Go to devchat.tv/levelup and you can register for the call. It's using Zoom's webinar software, so it's pretty straightforward. And what we're going to be doing is I'll do 10 minutes and I'll just show you how I do some form of how I level up. And then we'll just answer questions. And it's not going to be a question and answer like, hey, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? And then I say Rocky Road or whatever, right? Instead, what we're looking for is more along the lines of, I have this situation. How do I handle it? I'm trying to figure this thing out. How do I figure it out? I'm trying to stay current. How do I stay current? And if you have any of those kinds of questions, I'll bring you on the call. We'll ask some deeper questions. We'll make sure we get you a solid answer. And I'm really looking forward to helping some people out. There will be no sales, no selling, no nothing on these calls. It is literally just 10 minutes of training and then Q&A. So you can go check it out at devchat.tv/levelup.
I checked it out just now, and I didn't even know the first method in the list. Apparently, there's an abort method. Who has ever seen the abort method used in a Ruby program? No one. Never seen it. And it gets worse from there, really. Then you've got stuff like binding. No one knows how binding works. Call CC. Does it call the compiler? This is... I thought I knew this language. I don't know. How many of you, honestly, Chuck, how many of the kernel methods do you know?
Well, the other thing is a lot of times the stuff in kernel, it's not stuff you call against a method necessarily as much as you just call it within whatever you're doing, right? So like eval, for example, a lot of people are pretty familiar with eval, where it evaluates a string as Ruby code, right? Which is generally not a good idea, but that comes off of kernel, right? And so whatever context you're in, that context is bound to self, right? And self is an object. An object inherits from kernel. And so eval is available everywhere and within every object, right? And so that means it's available within every context, right? Same thing with .clone. You'll see that against a whole bunch of different objects, something .clone, but eval's an example of that. I'm trying to think of a few other ones that some of them you will see called against kernel, but most of them aren't.
I just want to go back to that eval thing. You say don't ever do it. Not to one-up you one, but to make life worse. Don't ever store Ruby code as records in your database to then pull down to eval.
I can't imagine where that would go wrong.
And it just, trying to debug when that goes wrong, it's just a nightmare.
Haven't you just described GitHub?
Yeah.
That's code in the database. You put it down. You've just described GitHub.
Yeah. Gets and puts are in there. Lambda, defining a lambda is in there. Anyway, there's all kinds of stuff in there. So yeah, go have a look. The P method, which is print or put s, get s, all of that's in there in kernel. Require is part of kernel. Anyway, so all this stuff that you take for granted in Ruby lives in kernel.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to go looking through that list to find new toys to play with. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there.
Yep. But because your program has a context, which is an object, and it has a binding that binds to that object, it has an inheritance up through object into kernel. And so that's why you can do things like put s, get s, and all that stuff. And incidentally, that's also why you can, when you do like a def method name, blah, 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 in just a Ruby file, it creates a singleton method on the object that you're working in, and it follows this same inheritance chain that Kingsley's talking about in his article. And so that's where this gets really powerful, is that within IRB or within just a Ruby script, all this stuff still applies, right? It's not just within your Rails app or within the context of some object that you form off of a class. This is everything. It also means you can break Ruby in really cool ways.
Now, I don't know if you knew this, but when you go into IRB, you have the self object.
Huh.
So when you're in there, it's not like you are not within any kind of context. You are, but the self.class is object.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had never done that to see what it was.
Me neither. I just did it a few minutes ago because I was wondering, wonder what the parent IRB object is.
You should prepend a module onto object and see what happens. Right? Just define your
just
own
prepend a module that has method.
I mean, you could, right?
And define new methods as you find they're missing.
Yeah. That is something that's worth talking about, is that it does call method missing up the chain as you move up the inheritance chain. And yeah, so you can conceivably, without defining the method, intercept the message.
Hang on. I thought it only called method missing after it's gone through the whole chain.
Yeah, but if
Does
you
it?
define your own,
Because you can define method missing on a class. And if it inherits, you can call super within method missing.
I think we're making a method.
Try it.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, there are ways of looking up method definitions, and method missing it'll not tell you that method is defined unless you update all the other stuff that tells you if a method's defined. So anyway, but yeah, do you have any favorite resources that you used, Kingsley, while you were figuring this stuff out? You said you did some research and looked at some of this stuff.
Yeah, I read the book, The Well-Grounded Rubist, and there's also this blog, practicingruby.com. There was an article about this lookup path too. Those are the two places I used. And aside from, I got some articles from Medium too. Yeah, I can't remember the titles, but those are the two main resources I used. Then it wasn't until last week that I came across Dave Thomas' video on YouTube.
Oh, nice. Are those videos on YouTube now? You used to have to pay for them.
It wasn't. He had this talk in I think it's Scotland. Yeah, so it was uploaded. Yeah, it was uploaded by someone on YouTube.
Okay, good deal. I'll see if I can find links to the video series on pragmatic programmers, because it's an older series, but it's still the way that Ruby does it. So
yeah,
very cool.
It totally only calls method missing after it's permanently ancestor chain. If it only calls that after it's gone all the way to the top, and then it starts again at the beginning and calls method missing on each if it exists on each successful object. I've proven it to myself through the power of IRB.
Interesting. Okay. I can only imagine why you would have to know that. But yeah, good deal. Was there anything else that we want to dive into on this particular topic? All right. Is there anything else that y'all want to ask Kingsley before we go to picks?
Yeah, Kingsley, what's the Ruby world like in Nigeria?
It has been growing really, really good. Just that the language in vogue here is JavaScript. It's pretty difficult to find programmers who are writing Ruby. I think before Ruby, I think there are other prominent languages like PHP, Python. Yeah. But in the past we've had talks, we've had Ruby little conferences, and I think there was one that held last year. I know it was online. Yeah, but there are also a handful of companies who are products of people who build stuff using Ruby, like one of the biggest cryptocurrency platform in Nigeria, Bitcoins, is built using Ruby. And there's another one again called QDAX, Ruby also. So I think another move that has helped the Ruby language in Nigeria is Andela. Lots of Andela engineers, lots of them. I know I have some friends there because I'm in Andela and we use Ruby too. So.
Cool. Are you mostly Rails? I know that a lot of European developers are doing like Hanami and things like that.
Yeah, Rails, yeah.
Cool. How did you get into Ruby?
Coincidence. That would be the shorter version. I tried to learn PHP. It wasn't making sense to me. Then I attempted to learn JavaScript, dabbled in and out. Then I stumbled on Ruby and it just made sense. Then decided to just stay there. Felt beautiful, it was intuitive and it was good. And it feels like the English language, which is why I like it. Stressless.
Had you done any basic or Visual Basic programming before?
No, I did a little bit of C. Very, very little.
It was all basic when I was growing up in the UK. Everyone had basic, and all the magazines were BBC Basic. The BBC had their own programming language called BBC Basic, and it was kind of print hello 20 go to 10, and that was what all the cool kids did in school. And the flow of the Ruby language is very readable. It's very close to kind of natural language, just like Basic was. So that's really why I kind of like the Ruby language, because it felt like home. It felt like home.
Kingsley, I wanted to ask you quick what your experience is like working for, doing an article for one of these third party like Honey Badger or Smashing Magazine. What's that process like? And yeah, I guess what's the process like?
Really, in simple form, is just figuring out platforms that need writers and applying. I started off with SitePoint initially, and my first article on SitePoint. At that point, I was really just starting up with Ruby programming. So the first article I wrote was basically having a list of resources for persons who wanted to start in Ruby too. So these are basically the kind of resources you should check out: the courses, the books, and the likes. And for Honey Badger was different because it had to be pretty much advanced in a way, or had to be kind of like teaching people. The first article I wrote on Honey Badger talked about active record transaction, Rails stuff. So the process is finding platforms that want authors, like that. platforms like ToothPlus, SitePoint, CSS Tricks. Those are platforms I've written for. For Smashing Magazine, I don't write for them. I just, I edit. I work with authors, people who write articles, help edit the content, recruit authors for Smashing Magazine, edit the content, go through the pitching process, speak with the reviewers and the likes, and put it up.
Cool.
I had a Smashing Magazine book. Did you ever have one of these, like an actual printed Smashing Magazine book? Did you have those?
No.
Yeah, it was on jQuery. I've no idea how I got hold of it, but it was like an actual book on jQuery, and it was on front end animations, which when I was doing it back in I think 2010 was like amazing. It was like it's kind of Flash free. Adobe Flash free technology and how to just use a jQuery to bump stuff around the screen. And yeah, I kind of owe a fair bit of my career to Smashing Magazine and their jQuery articles. But like I can see they've now branched out into different frameworks, like the React and the Vue. Which one, Kingsley? Which one is better, React or Vue?
I've used React more. But each time I use React, I miss the reactivity of Vue. For me, React kind of plays nice, and but Vue is simpler in a way. But I try not to dabble into the React versus Vue contention and everything. Right? I think it kind of depends on what you prefer, what you want. React, in a way, can do anything that Vue can do, and Vue can do what React can do.
I like Vue better because the same guy who did the Rails for Zombies tutorials also did the Vue tutorials, and I like him. So that's why, because I like Greg. So Vue always wins.
I'm going to tell Greg he has to listen to this just so that.
I'm looking for a CTO job, by the way. So if you want someone to make your technical decisions based on informed principles, I'm available.
Oh, there you go.
Kingsley, I thought this was a really great reference for what the load order for methods, right? For how it looks up. I'm definitely going to use this going forward, just as a refresher course to know, what methods are going to get called when. Do you have any advice for other people out there that are thinking about writing an article but are hesitant? Because the format of this is really great and the content is great, and it seems like you have a good kind of method going forward. I'd love to see some more, content from you going forward. Is there something that helped you to put this article on the web and to put your thoughts on paper?
I think the first thing is knowing that there are also case scenarios where you would need the content you write. For example, there's this article I wrote about React. I cannot remember the scenario because it's been a long time since I made use of it. I think I'm probably one of the person who always looks for the article to read on what I have written, because there are cases where I forget what I write. So most times is that the fact that this now, it's possible you would forget about it tomorrow or 5 months time or something, and you might have to make reference to it. Then there's also this quote by, or this tweet I remember by Chris. I'm not sure I can pronounce his surname very well, but Chris from CSS Tricks. And there's this thing he said, which is that if there's an article you wish you would have benefited from when you are starting to learn something, maybe React, Ruby or something, you should write it. The fact that there are lots of articles out there on the same topic does not mean that someone else cannot benefit from something that you've written. It's probably that your perception or your perspective on how you would put it will be different from the other content out there. And there might just be like 5 persons or 2 persons or 1 person, and that 1 person might be you who would benefit from it. So if I'm in a scenario where I'm confused about active record transaction, I think the first place I would look for, I'll check out is my article on Honeybadger about active record transaction and things like that.
Yeah, Chris Coyer is a terrific guy. And it's true, too. I mean, I had somebody reach out to me about a podcast episode that I put out where we were talking about something on JavaScript Jabber, and I said something that touched him, and you never know. It was something that I'd been thinking about it, and I just said something off the cuff, and yeah, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's something that, one of these guys say, and I hear about it. Somebody will take an excerpt of one of the shows and tweet it or something. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and start wrapping up and do some picks. Kingsley, if people want to follow you on Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn, stuff like that, or find your articles around the internet, where do they find you?
On Twitter, my username is Kinsomicrote, KINSOMIRCOTE. Yeah. I use the same, I try to maintain the same username. So GitHub, the same thing. On LinkedIn, the same thing.
Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks.
Hey, folks, if you love this podcast and would like to support the show, or if you wish you could listen without the sponsorship messages, then you're in luck. We're setting up new premium podcast feeds where you can get all of the episodes released after Christmas 2020 without the ads. Signing up will help us pay for editing and production, and you can go sign up at devchat.tv/premium.
Luke, you have some picks for us?
I do. Since we're doing method names, I'm going to go all the way back to 2014 and pick the active emoji gem. Remember that? Bit of a retro gem for you. The active emoji gem allows you to write code easily using emojis in Ruby 2.6 plus. Astound your co-workers, befuddle your code reviewers, use emojis to code in Ruby, and it really works. That's another pick. My second pick is also a gem, and it's a regular expression examples generator gem. So if you give it a regular expression, it will give you examples of strings that match that regular expression. I had to debug an issue on a customer site on Tuesday where someone had copy-pasted a 2-line regular expression designed to reformat XML timestamps. And that regular expression was chopping the final part of all incoming messages off the end of the timestamp message. So if the timestamp had one too many digits, it would actually remove the whole thing. So if I could have taken that mystery regex and generated some strings that it matched, I would have instantly been able to find the problem, but I couldn't. So I had to blindly guess until it works. So those are my two picks. The emoji gem and a gem to take a regular expression and give you strings which would match that regular expression.
Cool. Darren, what are your picks?
Okay, I've got a couple picks this week. The first one, actually, I'm going to double down, Chuck, on a pick that you made a few weeks ago. So you had mentioned the book Masters of Doom, and I got interested in that. So I started reading it. I'm about a third of the way through. It's fantastic, really interesting about how those guys got started. Mm-hmm. And it takes you back, right, to like the different engineering challenges at that point in time for gaming. I love that, they reference, it used to be, when back in the day, computing was a much smaller community. And so you would get subscribed to newsletters or magazines. They'd have the code listings. Actually, I thought about this too when you referenced the basic code. They'd have the code listings in the magazines and you type it into your, well, for me, I guess it was a Radio Shack computer. But anyway, really interesting book. So I'm looking forward to see where things turn out. So I will include that. And then to extend on the history theme, I'm also picking an article by Vinny Brazil, and it talks about covers a little bit of the history of Ruby on Rails. The concept is about how an art school from the early 1900s might have influenced Ruby on Rails design. So you can kind of see if you believe in that or not. But it does reference even the early presentation by DHH on building a blog site in about 15 minutes and how everything kind of took off from there. So it's just it's a good reminder of how we got to where we're at. And it's kind of fun to look at the history of Ruby and Rails. So those are my picks for this week.
Awesome.
So I have a couple picks here.
All right, Valentino,
my
what
first
are your
one
picks?
is, I just saw that the debug gem, which is coming to Ruby 3.1, I believe, it now has Chrome browser integration. So you can set a debug point and have it open the Chrome browser and play around with Ruby from within the Chrome session, which is kind of wild. Definitely, I would check that out and see if you like it or not. Another pick I have is a Ruby library I'm kind of excited to try out. It's called Polyphony, and it's a library for doing concurrent applications that are in log-running processes. So I've been playing a lot with integrated circuits and cases where I want to run Ruby in a background loop, and I've had a lot of trouble getting Ruby to play nicely with kind of joining the threads. And so I'm excited to try this out. It uses the IOU ring and libev libraries to kind of maximize the IO performance. So it looks very promising. It ties into Ruby fibers. I would definitely check that out.
Awesome. Dave, what are your picks?
So my first pick is Octoprint, which I may have picked before, but I'm going to pick again because it's really awesome. Octoprint is basically loadable onto a Raspberry Pi, and it essentially replaces the need to have a full desktop computer hooked up to a 3D printer. And just in general, I found it to actually produce better prints than what the provided solution was. So Octoprint's the first pick. The second pick is, I'm going to go ahead and pick Rails 7 Alpha 2. So Rails 7 is not fully released yet, but I've been making all of my screencasts that I do on Drift and Ruby with Rails 7 now, and it's actually been a breath of fresh air. I've really enjoyed it using ES build and CSS bundling. No more Webpacker. It just works. It's awesome. I'm still waiting for some gems to get updated, like Device, to support Rails 7. So there is that heated warning to not just jump in and upgrade right now, but starting off new projects and stuff. It's been a lot of fun.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to playing with the S build. I'm going to throw out a couple of picks on my own. The first pick I have is Top End Devs /coaching. I've been doing a ton of coaching. I've really been enjoying it. So yeah, if you're trying to figure out the next stage of your career, I basically have 3 tracks so that I'm coaching people on. One is kind of your more general career track. So people are trying to go from like junior to senior, senior to team lead to management, stuff like that. I've helped quite a few people make that leap. The other one is more kind of the podcasting track. A lot of people are trying to get a podcast or YouTube channel or something like that off the ground and grow their channel and increase their influence and be more attractive to employers or folks like that. And so I'm kind of lumping speaking in there as well. But having a media channel really helps you be attractive to conferences and employers and stuff like that. And the last area is freelancing. I seem to be getting a lot of people wanting to be freelancers. So if you want to go out and find clients or folks like that, then that's another option. So go to devchat.tv/coaching. topenddevs.com/coaching and check that out. You just give me some information about what you're trying to get to, and then we'll figure out how to get you on a call. And I usually help you kind of get things off the ground on the first call for free. And that helps us kind of know if it's a good match and things like that. And then we'll figure out a paid option if it's something that will work for both of us. So anyway, just putting that out there. Other picks. So I just finished a book and I need to look it up because I don't remember what it's called, but it is The Laws of Wealth, Psychology and the Secret to Investing Success by Daniel Crosby. It's so good. So good. So if you have a 401k or something like that, and you're trying to figure out where to put that money, or, you're investing in other ways, it's pretty awesome. So check that one out. I think that's pretty much all the picks I have. I've got some other stuff coming down the pipe. I'm going to probably be putting most of the other stuff related to that out on Top End Devs podcast. So just go to topenddevs.com and you can check that out. Kingsley, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, there's this book I got from Stripe Press. The title of the book is The Art of Doing Science and Engineering by Richard W. Hamming. It talks about great ideas, learning how to learn. And I think it's an old book, very, very old, since we're going back memory lane. So that is one. Then the second pick would be a Ruby gem I like to install whenever I'm on a new project. Annotates models. It helps annotate models routes and makes it easier so that I don't have to most times figure out how the table, the models are, the columns and everything. And yeah, I think those are the 2 picks I have.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming. This was a lot of fun, and hopefully it makes some people think about, okay, when I'm building my code, what is it actually doing? And yeah, we'll wrap up here. Till next time, folks, max out.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.